So we're going to analyze the Bald Soprano a lot more next week. But I do want to start with um, just a question that I'd like you to consider. And that question is, when we watch a humorous movie, when we watch a comedy of some sort, what is it that generally makes us laugh? Right? We have situational comedy in which people get themselves into ridiculous situations. I'm reminded of, for example, the scene in I Love Lucy from a very, very long time ago, where they start working on the line of chocolates, and the chocolates keep coming faster and faster and faster, and they're eating as many as they can and trying to package them, and things just get out of hand, right? And what we see in that particular situation is two people who are out of control, and it's just humorous because how did they get into this situation? What a crazy situation they have gotten themselves into. And there's a lot of physical comedy, there's a lot of humorous movements, and if we overanalyze it, it's not funny anymore, right? That's the way humor works. When we overanalyze it, it's too much, right? But situational comedy, right? I think we can generally agree is situational comedy is, for the most part, somebody's in a situation that feels ridiculous. And by ridiculous, we mean that we are glad, I believe, that we're not in that situation. Much of the humor that we encounter is us being glad that we are not in the place of a person who is in front of us. And I think we often will associate that with much of the humor that we see in sitcoms, much of the humor that we see in films. We're glad we're not these people because they're having a really terrible day, and sometimes we feel like they deserve it. Sometimes we feel like it's a bit of payback for something that they believed they could do, and clearly they weren't able to do it, and people warned them, and then they got themselves into this situation, right? There are other situations, right, where we have crude humor. And crude humor is funny because it feels inappropriate, and in many cases, right, the way that we deal with that in terms of crude humor is that we diffuse the situation with humor. All right, when we see people getting caught literally right with their pants down, or when we see them embarrassed by something that they're doing that is inappropriate, in many cases we laugh because, again, right, we're not in that situation, thank goodness, but also in many cases, right, they kind of deserve it, right? They've done something where they kind of deserve to be like that. I think a good example of this, if you know the show Friends, there's a very famous episode where Ross wants to wear leather pants. He goes to, on a date with these leather pants on. It's too hot. He takes them off, right, in a bathroom, and he can't get them back on. And then, right, hilarity ensues, right? And so, again, literally, we see him with his pants down. We see that everybody had sort of warned him already. You really shouldn't wear these. It's not going to end well. And then, clearly, it doesn't end well. So, I think that what we can understand is that many times situations and are not being in the position, but watching somebody else who is having a terrible time is a component of humor. Another component of humor can be simply puns, right? Word games, things that we are not expecting, things that are clever, but that strike us as funny. Juxtapositions of words, right? In many cases, right, this kind of humor is, again, kind of silly, kind of dumb, but it does, again, stem from maybe not a ridiculous situation, but a positioning of language that feels unexpected. Now, again, if we are sitting here having this discussion and everybody, out there in video land is saying, oh, good grief, dissecting humor makes it not so much funny. It's not so much fun. Yes, I think that's true, right? Over-explaining things can make humor less funny. But over-explaining things can sometimes make things really funny because, again, it's absurd, it's silly. And when we define, right, absurd and silly, I think that we are, in general, um, looking again in a much lighter sense at that idea of the absurd, where what we expect and what we get are not the same. Now, what can we do with this in theater? Well, I think we go back to very early theater, and what we see in Aristotle's Poetics is that his description of what makes theater good and what makes theater bad hinges on pretty much the same thing, right? We have to feel some sort of either empathy or contempt for a character that's on stage. If we feel empathy for them, then we hope things go well, and we feel bad when things do not, right? And that is the difference between something that is humorous, really, and something that is tragic, right? When we see a tragic play where we hope for the best for a character and they end up in a much worse position, right? In many cases, sometimes because of a fault of their own that we see as, this is a flaw I could have, right? Either overconfidence or just not being cautious, right? And we feel again, right, like we're glad we're not that person, but we sympathize with them. That is tragedy, right? On the opposite end of that spectrum, when we see somebody on stage that we have some contempt for, that we may enjoy seeing punished for bad deeds, right? This is, Aristotle considers, a lesser form of theater because it doesn't really make us empathize and teach us and make us want to be better people. It makes us, right, laugh, which is not a bad thing, but laughter in many cases in this is not considered to be as much of a virtue as feeling bad, feeling empathy, and realizing that we're learning something, right? The humorous component of a character, right, being beaten up or somehow taking a pratfall is funny. It is cathartic. In many cases, it does us good, but it's not seen as a higher form of theater, right? So where do we end up with Ionesco, and where do we end up with his ideas? We'll talk about that in a second.